Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on something that honestly shapes our entire modern world: engineering research. It's kind of like the invisible engine running behind everything. You know, the phone in your hand, the bridges you drive over. So let's break down how it all really works.
Really think about it. What holds all of this together? It's definitely more than just steel and concrete, right? It's this constant process of asking questions, testing things out, and discovering new ways of doing things. Every single time you drink a clean glass of water, or walk into a skyscraper, or use any piece of technology, all of that started as a question an engineer decided to answer through research.
And that gets us to the heart of it. This isn't just about discovery for the sake of discovery. Engineering research is a systematic scientific investigation that is laser-focused on solving real-world problems. It's the disciplined process that takes these abstract ideas floating around and turns them into actual, tangible solutions that you can see and touch.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the two big approaches, then see how theory actually meets practice. After that, we'll look at different ways engineers investigate things, how they solve tricky puzzles, and then finally, we'll wrap it all up to see why any of this really matters to you.
First up, Section 1. Let's dig into the two foundational pillars of all engineering research. You can think of these as the two main mindsets an engineer has when they kick off a new project. So, at its core, engineering research is driven by two different motivations. On one hand, you've got basic research. This is all about pure curiosity, about expanding what we know as a species, with no immediate payoff in mind. And on the other hand, you have applied research. This is where you take everything we already know to go fix a very specific problem. It's kind of like one builds the library of knowledge, and the other uses that library to build the world.
A perfect example of basic research. Imagine just studying nanomaterials. The goal isn't to immediately build a better phone screen or invent a new medical device. Nope. The goal is simply to answer the question, how does this stuff actually behave at such an incredibly tiny scale? The practical uses? Who knows? They might not show up for decades.
And now for the flip side, applied research. Here, the problem is crystal clear. Construction makes a ton of waste and uses up precious resources. So the goal is just as clear. Figure out how to use that industrial waste to create a new, eco-friendly concrete. See? This is research with a very specific mission.
So, if those are the two big whys of research, our next section is all about the how. These are the hands-on, get-your-hands-dirty tools and methods that engineers use to test their ideas and actually find some answers.
First up is experimental research, and this is probably what pops into your head when you think of science, right? It's all about control. You create a lab environment, you test a really specific hypothesis, and you see what happens when you change just one little thing. For example, think about water management. You're not going to build a full-scale dam just to see if your math is right. That would be insane. Instead, you build a miniature river right there in the lab. It's called a flume, and you test your hydraulic models there. It's a safe, controlled way to see exactly how water is going to behave out in the real world. But what if your experiment is way too big, or too expensive, or just physically impossible to do in a lab? Well, that's when you turn to a computer. Analytical and computational research uses really powerful math and models to basically simulate reality and predict what's going to happen.
A classic example of this is using software to build a virtual bridge. You can throw anything at it. Thousands of digital cars, a virtual earthquake, hurricane-force winds, and the computer can predict how every single beam and bolt will react. It lets engineers test endless designs without ever laying a single brick. It's incredible.
All right, moving on to Section 3. So we've talked about creating new knowledge and testing it in controlled environments, but sometimes the absolute best way to learn is to just go out and observe the world exactly as it is. And that's what we call descriptive research. For this, you can think of the engineer as part detective, part mapmaker. The job isn't to change a single thing. It's just to meticulously observe, measure, and document a system to get a perfectly clear picture of what's really going on.
Let's say a city is losing a ton of water from its pipes. You don't just start randomly digging up streets, right? No, you send out teams to survey the entire network, mapping every single leak they find. That descriptive work creates the map that shows you exactly where the problems are, so then you can go in and fix them efficiently.
Now, this is a big one. Sometimes the most important lessons we learn come from things that go horribly wrong. That's the whole point of case study research. It involves a super deep, almost forensic analysis of one specific project, often a failure, to understand every single factor that led to that outcome.
A dam collapse is an absolute catastrophe, but the investigation that follows, that's some of the most critical research an engineer can possibly do. By digging in and finding the root causes, the material failures, the design flaws, the environmental factors, we can create new safety rules and practices to make sure it never, ever happens again. Let's dive into our last set of research methods here in Section 4. So what happens when the problem itself is, well, kind of fuzzy? Or when you're stepping into totally new territory? These are the tools engineers use for tackling ambiguity. This is what we call exploratory research. You do this when you don't even know what the right questions are yet. Seriously, it's about wandering into the unknown, looking for interesting patterns, and just trying to define a problem that you can then attack with those other methods we talked about. A fantastic super modern example is exploring how AI can be used in civil engineering. The question is really broad. Something like, hey, how can this new AI technology help us? Researchers might test all sorts of algorithms on sensor data from a bridge, not to solve one specific crack, but just to explore what's even possible. And finally, we have correlational research. This is all about finding relationships. Now, it's really important to remember this doesn't tell you that one thing causes another, but it does tell you that two things seem to be connected in some way. It's about spotting patterns in the data. For instance, by analyzing a bunch of data, an engineer might find a really strong link. When the moisture content in the soil goes up, the number of landslides in that area also goes up. Now, that correlation is a huge red flag. It lets them develop early warning systems, even before they understand the exact physics of every single hillside. Okay, let's bring it all home in our last section. We've looked at all these different tools and methods, but why does any of it matter? How does all this work that happens in labs and on computers actually change our daily lives? This is really where the magic happens. Every single method we've discussed is like a gear in a much bigger machine. That machine drives innovation and technology. Think about that basic research on nanomaterials leading to who knows what new tech. It's how we solve global challenges like climate change. That applied research is literally creating the sustainable concrete for tomorrow's cities. It strengthens the link between theory and practice. It takes those computer models of bridges and data from lab experiments and turns them into real physical structures you can walk on. And maybe most importantly, it helps create safety regulations and policy. Those case studies of failures in the data on landslides, they directly lead to the safety rules that protect our lives every single day. When you boil it all down, it comes to this one powerful idea. All of this stuff, from the most abstract, basic research to the most detailed case studies, these aren't just academic exercises. They are the actual tools we use to actively design and build a better, safer, and more innovative future for everyone. So, we'll just leave you with this thought. We've just taken a tour through the entire engineer's research toolkit. Now that you know the tools that are used to turn ideas into reality, what problem out there are you going to solve? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.